Marie Bennett tightened her apron as she stood at the register, the waistband fraying from years of use. The late afternoon sun streamed weakly through the glass storefront of Landry's Market, painting long, tired shadows across the aisles. Outside, the streets were quiet, save for the occasional rumble of a passing car. This was the lull she both dreaded and appreciated, the slow stretch between the lunch rush and the dinner crowd. It gave her time to catch her breath, but it also gave her mind too much room to wander. She shifted her weight, her feet aching after hours of bagging groceries and restocking shelves. Marie glanced up at the old analog clock mounted above the bakery section. 3 more hours, just 3. She leaned against the counter and let her gaze drift over the familiar scene, shelves neatly stocked with cans and boxes, the faint smell of yeast wafting from the bakery, the hum of the refrigerators in the back. There were parts of this job she liked, the regulars who greeted her with a smile, the sense of rhythm in the daily tasks, but sometimes it was hard to ignore the weight of everything she carried. At 29, Marie had imagined a completely different life for herself. She dreamed of becoming a nurse or maybe a teacher, but those dreams had derailed 7 years ago when her mom fell ill. The hospital bills piled up faster than anyone could have predicted, swallowing their savings. Marie had dropped out of college to take care of her mom, and after her passing, the debts didn't disappear. Now she lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet, stretching each paycheck to cover rent and utilities. Her days were long, and her nights were spent at the kitchen table, staring at unopened bills and wondering how she'd ever catch up. She didn't resent her life. There were people who had it much worse, but sometimes the weight of it all felt like a slow, relentless tide pulling her under. As Marie adjusted the small rack of gum and candy near her register, the jingling bell above the front door caught her attention. A man walked in, holding a baby in one arm. The baby babbled softly, his little fingers clutching at his father's shirt. The man shifted him higher on his hip, his expression weary but focused. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, and his clothes, though clean, were worn at the edges. Marie tried not to stare as he made his way down one of the aisles. She returned her focus to the customer in front of her, scanning their items and chatting politely. But when the man approached her register a few minutes later, his face caught her attention again. There was something in his expression, an invisible weight, a quiet desperation. "Just this," he said, setting down a single pack of diapers. Marie nodded and scanned the item. "That'll be $14.76, she said, her voice calm and steady. The man adjusted the baby, who was now gnawing on the strap of his jacket, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a handful of crumpled bills and coins, carefully counting them on the counter. His fingers moved quickly, and for a moment he seemed hopeful. Then his face fell. He paused, letting out a slow breath as he closed his hand around the coins. "Shoot," he muttered under his breath. "I'm sorry, I thought I had enough. I'll have to come back for these later." Marie's chest tightened at his words. She had seen moments like this before too many times. Parents with tired eyes, scraping together what they could to stretch another week, forced to make impossible choices. She glanced at the man again, noticing the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders, the way he cradled his child as though shielding him from the world. "Wait," she said gently. The man looked up, his face guarded. Marie reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out her debit card. She slid it across the counter before he could protest. "I've got it," she said, her voice kind but firm. The man's eyes widened and he shook his head quickly. No, I can't let you do that. That's too much. I'll figure it out." "It's okay," Marie said, holding his gaze. "Really. Everyone needs a little help sometimes." For a moment he hesitated, his eyes darting between her face and the baby in his arms. Finally, his shoulders sagged and he nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I don't even know what to say. This means so much." Marie handed him the bag with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about it. Just take care of that little one. Okay. The man nodded again, cradling the baby closer as he turned to leave. His steps were slow, as though he was still processing what had just happened. Marie watched them go, her heart heavy but full. She knew she had done the right thing, but as she turned back to her register, a familiar pang of worry crept in. Her own bank account was dangerously low, and payday was still 4 days away. She shook the thought away, focusing on the next customer in line. Helping someone in need was worth tightening her own belt a little more this week. That evening, as Marie walked home, the quiet hum of streetlights accompanied her thoughts. She unlocked the door to her apartment and stepped inside, the smell of chipped paint and stale air greeting her like an old companion. She made a small dinner, canned soup and crackers, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of unopened bills in the corner. She couldn't stop thinking about the man and his baby. She wondered about their story. Was he a single dad? Had he lost his job? Was there anyone in his life to help him? Marie sipped her soup slowly, her thoughts circling back to the moment at the register. She had seen the mix of disbelief and relief in his eyes when she offered to pay. It reminded her why she believed in small kindnesses, even when her own circumstances were less than ideal. Sometimes, a single gesture could make all the difference. What Marie didn't know was that her act of generosity had left a profound impression on the man. Eric carried the pack of diapers home that evening with a lightness he hadn't felt in weeks. His son Noah babbled happily in his arms, oblivious to his father's struggles. Eric had been at the end of his rope that day, barely holding everything together, but the cashier's kindness had thrown him a lifeline. He placed Noah in his crib and stood there for a moment, watching his son drift off to sleep. Then, he made a quiet promise to himself. Somehow, some way, he would repay the kindness of the woman who had stepped in when he needed it most. Not just for the diapers, but for the hope she had given him. Neither of them could have known it at the time. But that small act of kindness was the beginning of something much bigger. Eric stood in his small kitchen the next morning, bouncing Noah gently on his hip as he stared at the coffee maker. The rhythmic drip of the machine was soothing, blending with Noah's happy babbles as the baby grabbed for the sleeve of his father's shirt. The diapers sat on the counter, a reminder of the woman at Landry's market who had stepped in to help him. Eric couldn't stop thinking about her, the calm, steady kindness in her voice, and the way she'd insisted on helping without hesitation or judgment. He glanced down at Noah, who was gnawing on his tiny fist, and smiled faintly. The relief of having enough diapers for the week had lifted a weight he hadn't realized was crushing him. But it wasn't just the diapers. It was the reminder that there were people in the world who cared, even when they didn't have to. "I'll figure out a way to thank her," Eric said quietly, as if making a promise. Noah let out a delighted squeal, oblivious to the gravity of his father's words. After dressing Noah and packing his diaper bag, Eric dropped him off with Mrs. Calhoun, the elderly woman who lived down the hall. She had been a godsend since Noah was born, always eager to babysit, while Eric worked his part-time shifts at the mechanic's shop. "There's my favorite little man," Mrs. Calhoun said, scooping Noah into her arms as Eric handed her the bag. "Thanks again, Mrs. Calhoun," Eric said, running a hand through his hair. "You don't have to thank me, dear," she said with a smile. "You're doing your best. That's all that matters." Eric gave her a grateful nod before heading to the bus stop. As he sat on the bench waiting for the bus, he pulled out a small notepad and pen from his jacket pocket. The woman's face flashed in his mind again, and Eric jotted down ideas. A thank you card? A bouquet of flowers? Both seemed nice, but somehow they didn't feel like enough. He snapped the notebook shut with a sigh. He wanted to do something meaningful, something that truly reflected what her kindness had meant to him. Marie's day at Landry's market started much like the one before. She arrived early, tying on her apron, and beginning her shift by restocking shelves and straightening displays. The quiet rhythm of her work usually helped calm her thoughts, but today, her mind kept drifting back to the man and his baby. She wondered if he had made it home okay. Did he have enough food? Enough help? Marie shook her head, trying to push the questions aside. She had done what she could. "Morning," Marie, her co-worker Clara said, walking up with a clipboard in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Clara was a few years older, with a sharp sense of humor that often lightened long shifts. "Morning," Marie replied, giving her a faint smile. "You look more tired than usual," Clara said, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't sleep much last night," Marie admitted. Clara leaned against the shelf. "You've been running on empty for weeks. You need to take care of yourself." "I'm fine," Marie said, brushing it off. Clara studied her for a moment but didn't press. Marie appreciated the concern, but she rarely opened up about her struggles, even to Clara. What would she say anyway? That her electric bill was overdue again? That her landlord had left another warning notice under her door? That some nights she went to bed hungry just to stretch her groceries a little further? Instead, Marie focused on her work. It was easier that way. Eric's shift at the mechanic's shop was steady but exhausting. The clatter of tools and the hum of engines filled the garage as he worked on oil changes and brake replacements. He liked the work; it was straightforward, and he was good at it, but the part-time hours weren't enough to make ends meet. During his lunch break, Eric pulled out his notepad again. This time he started brainstorming ways to improve his situation. He needed more hours or a better job altogether. Noah deserved more than just scraping by. Eric, his boss, called, interrupting his thoughts. "Got a minute?" Eric wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. His boss, a gruff man with a soft spot for his employees, leaned against the office door. "You've been doing good work," he said. "Reliable, quick, and customers like you. How'd you feel about moving to a full-time position?" Eric blinked. "Full-time?" "Yeah," his boss said, nodding. "Better pay, more hours, and after 3 months you'll qualify for partial benefits. Think about it." Eric didn't have to think long. "I'd love that," he said, his voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside him. His boss grinned. "Good. Let's get the paperwork started." That evening, Eric returned home with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. After tucking Noah into bed, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at his notepad again. With the promise of a full-time job, his situation was finally starting to shift. He could pay off bills, save a little, and maybe even move into a better apartment. But first, he wanted to keep the promise he had made to himself. Eric picked up his pen and began to sketch out a plan. This time, he wasn't content with a small gesture. The woman's kindness had been more than a momentary relief; it had been a turning point. He wanted to show her just how much it had mattered. With a pen in hand and determination in his heart, Eric mapped out the first steps of his plan, knowing that this time, he finally had the means to make it happen. Eric sat at his kitchen table late one evening, the soft glow of the single overhead bulb casting warm light on his notebook. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of Noah's baby monitor. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind. His full-time position had officially begun, and though the long hours left him tired, the security of a stable income brought relief he hadn't felt in years. He looked down at the checkbook in front of him. For the first time in his adult life, there was money left over after paying bills. It wasn't much, but it was enough to breathe a little easier. He had even opened a small savings account for Noah, imagining all the things he could finally plan for school, birthday celebrations, a future that felt within reach. But before anything else, Eric knew what he wanted to do. The kindness that Cashier at Landry's Market had shown him months ago had been more than a one-time gesture. It had carried him through a dark moment, igniting hope when he had none. He tore a check from his book, carefully wrote out $1,000, and slipped it into an envelope. Next, he reached for a pen and a blank card. Dear Marie, you might not remember me, but a few months ago, you helped me when I couldn't afford diapers for my son. That simple gesture meant more to me than I could ever explain. At the time, I felt like I was failing as a father. Every day was a struggle, and I couldn't see a way forward. But your kindness reminded me that there are good people in the world, people who care even when they don't have to. You gave me hope, and that hope helped me keep going. Things are better now. I have a full-time job, and Noah and I are finally finding our footing. I wanted to share a piece of that with you, not as repayment, but as a way to honor the kindness you showed me. Thank you for being the kind of person who makes the world brighter. With gratitude. Eric and Noah. He tucked the card and the check into the envelope, then added a photo of Noah. It was one of his favorites, a snapshot he had taken on a sunny afternoon in the park. Noah's wide, toothy grin was infectious, his small hands clutching a blue ball. The next morning, Eric stopped by a local gift shop on his way home from work. He browsed the shelves carefully, finally selecting a bouquet of sunflowers and a small box of chocolates. Their warmth and simplicity felt right, thoughtful but not overwhelming. When he got home, he placed everything in a gift bag, pausing to double-check that the envelope was securely nestled inside. He felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as he zipped the diaper bag for Noah and headed out the door. Marie's morning at Landry's Market had been uneventful. The quiet hum of activity and the rhythm of scanning and bagging groceries filled her shift as usual. She greeted regular customers, shared polite small talk, and tried not to let her mind wander too far into her worries. The donation box she had set up near the customer service desk had continued to grow. Other customers had begun contributing diapers, wipes, and formula, and watching the community come together filled her with quiet pride. But today, her thoughts kept drifting to her own challenges and overdue electric bill, the growing need for new shoes as her worn-out sneakers reached their breaking point. She adjusted her apron, preparing for the lunch rush, when she noticed a familiar figure approaching her line. It took a moment for her to place him, but when the man smiled at her and she saw the baby on his hip, recognition hit her. "Hi," Eric said, his voice steady but warm. Marie's face lit up. "Oh, hi, it's been a while. How are you both?" "We're doing great," Eric said, shifting Noah slightly on his hip. "Better than I ever thought possible, honestly. And I owe a lot of that to you." Marie blinked, surprised. "To me?" Eric nodded, setting the gift bag on the counter. "I came here to say thank you. For what you did for us that day. You didn't have to, but you did, and it made all the difference." Marie tilted her head, her cheeks flushing slightly. It was just a pack of diapers. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Eric said firmly. "Not everyone would have. And it wasn't just the diapers, it was what they meant. You saw me struggling, and you helped without hesitation. That's something I'll never forget." Marie hesitated, her hand hovering over the gift bag. "What is this?" "It's just a thank you," Eric said, smiling softly. She opened the bag carefully, her fingers brushing the sunflowers and chocolates before finding the envelope. Pulling it out, she unfolded the card and began to read. Her eyes widened when she saw the check. "Eric," she said, her voice trembling. "This is too much. You didn't have to." "I did," Eric said, cutting her off gently. "I wanted to. Your kindness carried me through one of the hardest times in my life. This is my way of honoring that. Please don't think of it as repayment. It's just gratitude." For a moment, Marie couldn't speak. The bustling noise of the store faded into the background as she looked at the check, the card, and the picture of Noah grinning up at her. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away, giving Eric a soft smile. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion in it. "This means more than I can say." Eric nodded, feeling a sense of closure. "You deserved it." As Eric turned to leave, Marie called out, "Wait." He stopped and looked back. You've made a difference too, she said. More than you know. Eric smiled, adjusting Noah on his hip as he headed for the door. That evening, Marie sat at her small kitchen table, the envelope, card and photo spread out in front of her. She felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years, a sense of being seen, of being valued. For the first time in a long while, she let herself dream. Marie sat in the break room at Landry's Market during her lunch break, her hands resting lightly on the gift bag Eric had given her. The sunflowers had brightened her day, their cheerful petals standing out against the beige walls. But it was the check and the heartfelt note that had left her stunned. Marie had reread Eric's card several times since he left. Each time, her heart swelled with gratitude and humility. She hadn't done much, just bought a pack of diapers, but to Eric, it had meant the world. And now, with his unexpected gift, he had lifted a weight off her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Her overdue electric bill had been hanging over her head for weeks, a dark cloud that she'd been trying to ignore. Thanks to Eric's generosity, she could pay it off, buy groceries, and maybe even replace the shoes she had been wearing for far too long. But as Marie leaned back in her chair, a new thought began to take root in her mind. What if she could use some of Eric's gift to help others the way she had helped him? Eric, meanwhile, was settling into his new routine. The full-time job had brought stability, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was building something solid for himself and Noah. His growing sense of security also made him more aware of others around him. He noticed things he hadn't before: the tired mother in the coffee shop struggling to calm her child, the older man at the bus stop fumbling with his change. One afternoon, as Eric waited in line for coffee, he saw a young man ahead of him sigh in frustration as he checked his wallet. The cashier looked at him expectantly, but the man shook his head, stepping aside and mumbling an apology. Eric didn't think twice. "I'll cover it," he said, handing the cashier his card. The young man blinked, startled. "Are you sure? You don't have to." "It's no problem," Eric said with a smile. "Pay it forward when you can." As Eric left the shop with his coffee, he thought of Marie. Her small gesture had set this all in motion. He hoped his own acts of kindness, no matter how small, might do the same for someone else. The idea of paying it forward stayed with Marie all afternoon. By the time her shift ended, she had made up her mind. The next morning, she stood in the baby aisle of a discount store, her cart already half full with diapers, formula, and baby wipes. Each item reminded her of Eric's gratitude and the way his eyes had softened when he spoke about Noah. She couldn't help everyone, but she could help someone. When she returned to the store for her shift, she approached Linda, her manager, who was busy sorting invoices at the customer service desk. "Morning, Marie," Linda said without looking up. "What's all that?" Marie set the large box of supplies on the counter. "I was hoping we could set this up here," she said, her voice steady but nervous. "For parents who might be struggling. They could take what they need, no questions asked." Linda raised an eyebrow, finally looking up from her work. "You bought all this yourself?" Marie nodded. "I had some extra, and someone helped me when I needed it. I just want to pay it forward." Linda's face softened and she smiled. "I think it's a wonderful idea. Let's see how it goes." By the end of the day, the box was in place near the customer service desk, complete with a small handwritten sign that read, "For parents in need, take what you need, no questions asked." The box quickly became a quiet fixture at Landry's Market. At first, only a few customers noticed it, parents who hesitated before tentatively taking a pack of diapers or a can of formula. But word began to spread, and soon, the box was making a real impact. One evening, as Marie was bagging groceries for a customer, a young mother approached her, holding a small pack of wipes from the donation box. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you the one who set this up?" Marie glanced at the box, then back at the woman, and nodded. "I did. Is everything okay?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know how I was going to make it through the week. This is such a blessing. Marie felt her throat tighten with emotion. She reached out and gently squeezed the woman's hand. You don't have to thank me, she said softly. I've been there too. The woman smiled, clutching the wipes to her chest as she walked away. As the weeks went on, the box became more than just a resource for struggling parents, it became a symbol of generosity in the community. Customers began asking how they could contribute, and soon, donations of baby supplies started pouring in. Marie watched with quiet amazement as the small act of paying it forward blossomed into something much bigger than herself. She thought of Eric often, wondering if he knew just how far his kindness had rippled. One evening, as Marie walked home under a sky streaked with the colors of sunset, she paused in front of her apartment building. The soft glow of her kitchen window beckoned her, but she lingered on the sidewalk, letting the cool air brush against her cheeks. She felt a sense of peace that had been absent for a long time. Her struggles weren't gone, they never truly disappeared, but they felt lighter. She thought of the families who had taken supplies from the box, the quiet relief in their eyes as they realized they didn't have to go without. She thought of Eric and how his gratitude had rekindled a part of her she thought she'd lost. Kindness, she realized, wasn't just something you gave. It was something that grew, passed from person to person like a quiet flame lighting a dark room. Marie smiled to herself as she finally stepped inside, ready to dream of what might come next.